Fire, what you saying?
Yeah, man, we give thanks to life again as usual, you know?
No, serious thing. We are here, Ballhead and the Dread. Do remember June 25th, Chant Down Baltimore free show. Headliner, that is Freddie McGregor, My Jr., Autarchii will be there. Also, look out for Generation Gap Rhythm coming in March. Today, we have a special guest, Abrasion Irate, and people may feel away when I say this, but this is one of my favorite reasons I've ever done. I never knew the serious thing because everybody know I interview enough people, but this Abrasion reason on the heights. Dr. Jermaine McCalpin, Fire, what's going on?
Yeah, man, blessings.
Well, we know you're a busy person, and we give thanks for you giving the time and coming back, right? And we want to get right into the reasoning right now. So I would appreciate if you would clarify this misconception people have on critical race theory. I hear a lot of people who speak about it, but it seems like they don't clearly understand it. So we appreciate if you clarify that for the people.
All right. So the reality of it, first of all, is that most people know critical race theory based on what the critics have said rather than what the proponents have said, right? So most people dismiss critical race theory as this idea of wanting white people to feel guilty, every white person to feel guilty about the reality of racism in America's past and present. But critical race theory has been around for almost 40 years, and it's not really a single theory. It's a framework using an interdisciplinary approach. So sociology, it really started in law, because critical race theory, just to give you a history, critical race theory comes out of critical law studies. Why? This idea that America's institutions are inherently institutionally racist. And so the policies that are disseminated through public policy are therefore racist. One of the targets of critical race theory is this idea that racism is just a few bad apples. What critical race theory argues is that it is structured in the way institutions develop in the US. The critical race theorist proponents were primarily lawyers, right? Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bell, Harvard Law professor, Delgado, Patricia Williams. These are some of the proponents of critical race theory, starting this reasoning from in the late 1960s, looking at America's justice system, looking at the criminal justice system, looking at the inherent racist formulations of law and how they are practiced in how they discriminate against Blacks. So most people look at critical race theory now, and anything that has Black in it is now critical race theory. But critical race theory is far more specialized. It's not even just about anti-racism. Critical race theory says, first of all, the first and obvious tenet of critical race theory is this, that race is inherently a social construct. The second follows from the first, that though it is inherently a social construct, it is socially significant, right? So some want to hear just it's a social construct and run with it and say, well, race don't exist, without looking at the structural significance of race. So let's look at a definition of racism, because most times people think racism is just, this person don't like that person. How I define racism is that it combines 3 P's. Racism is a global system of domination and oppression, right? Not just bias, it's a system of domination and oppression that combines privilege, prejudice, and power, right? So most people become nervous when they hear privilege because some people don't want to be told that white privilege is a real thing. They want to make the argument that we have moved on from this in America and we must stop looking back in the past. Racism was never just about 1 and 2 persons having bias. It was structured in the system. How people got jobs, where people could live, what kind of housing they could get, what kind of loans they could get. That is what critical race theory is saying. We must interrogate the very core of America and its structures and institutions, and that's where we see racism. Stop looking at the white man that might record a Black man doing something that he should do normally. That is just the minor manifestations. While we checking that, the system persists as inherently racist. So we checking off the 1 and few Karens, without looking at the structure of institutions and the kind of policies that emerge out of those institutions.
No, it's a reality meds fire because when I reason with people, I try to let them know a lot of the people that they try to categorize as racist don't have power to really do anything with your life. They themselves are struggling. They may be prejudiced or they can make some type of stereotypical comment, but they don't have any power to change any part of your life.
So this is the thing about racism, is that if we operate and live in a world where racism structures the nature of relationships, it structures the relationship even if it's two Black persons interacting with each other, right? Because they're operating in the framework that has already indoctrinated into them the idea of Black inferiority, right? So you can have two Black persons. The way I teach my class, I say to them that if every racist dies tomorrow, you can still have racism. Why? Because the institutions will persist even if the people who structured those relationships die. The institutions persist. Let's look at mortgage lending, right? When you're a mortgage broker, there are codes and there are ways of determining whether the lender, the borrower is Black or white or Hispanic. They have codes. Where did those codes come from? Because Blacks were not supposed to be given any housing relationship with certain neighborhoods. We call it redlining. And in New York, there were restrictive covenants where you couldn't sell to a Black person, right? These are structures of relationship that it don't matter whether or not you're a well-meaning mortgage broker. It was in the covenant that it could not be sold to a Black person.
You know, the funny you mentioned that, because I have a question with BS as a spin-off now, because you have a lot of people, them say, all right, put all of that aside, which we know so you can't put it aside, but for the sake of for them conversation, because sometimes it's like you have to come down to for them level of reasoning. And to put all of that aside, but in this current day, look how many Black people are striving, and them use a few examples with them seeing in the media. How we really show them say systematic racism and critical race theory. There's a whole heap of different aspects towards this thing. How we really break that down to them in the simplest form we can. Make them really get it.
Let us go back to the most obvious example. In November 2008, a Black man won president of the United States. And I remember someone saying to me, well, this is it. Blacks can't ask for reparations again because a Black man become president. And I say to them, this is the problem. We have in America this idea of Black exceptionalism, that because one Black person make it, it means that the system is structured for every Black person to make it. That's what racism does, it gives us an exception to the rule. And so if you're a sheep or if you're vulnerable in mind, you run with it and say, well, racism is done. Well, let's look at what has happened since Barack Obama left office in November 2016. All right, I don't need to say anything else. So when we look at the structure of relationships, we don't just focus on an individual, we focus on aggregated movement. How is the average Black person treated? How is the average person of Spanish descent treated? How is the person that is from the Caribbean treated? We're not talking about whether you can point to a Black millionaire or a Black billionaire or a Black person with a PhD. Trick Daddy says it in one of his songs in America. He says four PhDs and you're still an N, right? Because what he's saying is that the system doesn't make any regard for how well you are spoken of, where you live, what your accomplishments are. When you are met with the police and when you are met with a coercive apparatus, you are treated as Black, not as Black and educated, not as Black and have money. You're just treated as Black. So Black exceptionalism is one of the most hilarious justifications when we talk about critical race theory. We are nowhere near the formulation. Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture in 1967, along with Charles Hamilton, they wrote a book about blueprint for Black liberation, for Black power. And they defined on record for the first time, 1967, the term institutionalized racism. First time it enters our lexicon. And what they in effect says is that racism is not fundamentally just about some bigots or some people who are very virulent in their hatred for blacks. It is how the institutions that govern a society are structured and inherently racist in their practices. When we look at the criminal justice system, I tell people it would imply that blacks are more criminal because more blacks are incarcerated. What it does not tell you is that they're more likely to be arrested on suspicion, they're more likely to be convicted, and they're more likely to be given harsher sentences, and they are more likely to plead to crimes they didn't commit. That is what structural racism does. So when we look at these things, we have to look beyond what people say and what the institutions produce. 66% of the incarcerated population is non-white. Presumably, to the small mind, that would mean that blacks are more criminal. But that's not the case. They are convicted and they're more likely to be sentenced, and they're more likely to not have proper legal representation and therefore go to jail for crimes that they didn't commit.
Well, let me hear you say mountain, mountain.